Hi, Dora Elizabeth Hunt Jones, and I was born in Alexandria, Virginia. I was born in what's known, when I was growing up, it was called the Bird, the BIRD, and now it's called the BERG. But I was literally born in the projects at 410 North Royal Street. I was born at home, and while my mother was in labor waiting for the midwife to come, the midwife didn't make it in time, so my grandmother actually delivered me. And I was born with what's called a veil over my face, which older people said I had the gift of sight, maybe, maybe not. But anyway, I was born at home. My parents are Minnie Mae Calloway Hunt and James Edward Hunt. My mother was born in Alexandria. My father was born in Danville, Virginia. I grew up in the Bird up until I was about 10, I think 9 or 10 years old. I went to Lyles Crouch Elementary School on the south side until they decided that the children in the Bird should go to, no, take that back. I went to Charles Houston, I'm sorry. And then they decided we should go to Lyles Crouch. Growing up in the Bird, in the projects, my father was the supervisor for the Alexandria Housing Authority. He's the first black man to have that position. And later in life, we found out that he gave a lot of people their first jobs. So after growing up in the Bird, my parents divorced when I was, I think, 10 or 11. And then my father moved in with my grandmother moved in with us, and she raised us. So I lived at 410 North Royal Street. Then we moved to 407 Princess Street, which is still the projects, still the Bird, and stayed there, like I say, till I was 9 or 10. Then we moved to the south side, which is everything on the other side of King Street in South Alexandria. Out there, I lived in the 300 block of South Patrick Street, where now that's where Alpha Street Baptist is. Both buildings, I grew up on that street. It was a two-way street then. Now it's a one-way street. It turned one way, I think, when I was in my teens. But growing up there, like I said, I went to Lyles Crouch. Then I went to Charles Houston from the first grade to the fourth grade. In the second grade, the school was crowded, so they actually made a classroom down at the Alexandria Housing Authority down on Royal Street, and they called it Parker Madden School. I went there in the second grade. Then I went back to Charles Houston for the third and the fourth grade. I had the same teacher, first grade, third grade, fourth grade, Miss Ardelia Hunter, which a lot of people in Alexandria knew. For the second grade, I had Miss Goods, her maiden name was Carter. Then after that, moving on the south side, graduating from seventh grade at Lyles Crouch, I went to Parker Gray High School, which was the black high school, in the eighth grade. When I went to school there, one of my basic memories is in eighth grade, back then they had what are called tracks, and it was 8-1, 8-2, 8-3, 8-4, 8-6, 8-1 being the highest and 6 being the lowest. Well, somebody made a clerical error, and they put me in 8-6. So for the first quarter, I got straight A's, and they said, something's wrong here. Somebody finally looked into it, and I didn't get transferred to 8-1 until the second semester, but they finally put me in with the right peers. And one of the things about that is I was only 12 years old. So, I was 11 when school started, and I was 12 when the year ended. Going to Parker Gray, I went to Parker Gray from the 8th grade to the 10th grade. In my 10th grade year, schools were segregated, so I went to an all-black school, but then they decided, I guess the desegregation laws had come out, that was in 56, but in Alexandria, schools were still segregated. In the 1964-65 school year, they decided that maybe we can put some of these black students in a white school. So about 20 of us passed the test and oral interviews. I don't remember too much about them, but I know we had a test, we had an oral interview, and about 20 of us who were in the 10-1 grade at that time, we got transferred to GW. But unfortunately, in my 11th grade, I got married, had my first child, so I missed that year out of school. But I went to summer school. I took 11th grade English. So in the 65-66 school year, which was the first year of full integration in Alexandria. The schools were not, we had students going to other schools, but the whole school system in the 1965-66 school year, that was the first year of full integration in Alexandria. And I went through the 12th grade, graduated when I was 17, and remember, got married, had a child. I still came back, and I had enough credits, so they let me graduate. Back then, you only had to have 16 credits to graduate. And imagine, I only went back then high school was 5 years instead of 4 years, like it is now. And I'd only gone 4, and I still graduated with the class that I started with. After that, of course, I was married. I became a housewife. And my husband and I, we lived in a house that had rooms and a kitchen and things like that. And we applied for a project in the White projects, which were on West Street. They're gone now. But we were the 16th black family to move in that development that had about 200 units. It was rough. They were still burning crosses at that time. A cross got burned on our lawn. And we put it out. And after I started meeting people in the neighborhood and got friends with them, that kind of stopped. There were still people there that didn't want us there, but we were there. And at that time, my husband was a truck driver, long-distance tractor-trailer driver. So I was home alone a lot with my kids. So sometimes I was a little afraid, but then, after I met some of my neighbors and they saw I was okay and I was nice, then some of that stopped. We lived there for about, I think, 3 years. And then we finally, my husband's father purchased homes in Alexandria. He was buying a home for each one of his sons. So we moved into one of those homes. In the beginning, we rented it. And then later on, we bought that house that was in Del Rey on 300 block of Clifford Avenue. So I moved from the projects to Del Rey to a townhouse with at that time, I had 3 kids. When I was 20, I went to work for the first time in my life. And I went to work at the Pentagon. I had applied to the telephone company and a couple of other places. I actually had gotten a job at the telephone company the year before, but a month before I was to go to work, I was pregnant, so I couldn't go to work there. But I started working at the Pentagon when I was 20 years old. First time I rode the bus, I'd never been out of Alexandria. We were, my father was very close with us. We stayed home. He was very strict, so we didn't get to go a lot of places like other people. But when I was 20, I got a job. I went to work at the Pentagon. And riding the bus there, I had to ask the bus driver, could you tell me when I get to the Pentagon so I could get off the bus? Because, like I said, I'd never ridden a bus before because my father, like I said, he worked for the Housing Authority, and then he was a mechanic, and he got a job with Rosenthal Chevrolet. He's one of the first black men to become a supervisor there. Then he moved to work for Coons Ford, and he worked New Car Get Ready. He was the first black man to get a supervisory job there because Mr. Coons, we always called him Old Man Coons. He liked my father, and he saw that he was a good worker and everything, so he gave him that job. At one time, he had like 200 men working for him. So even though we were not wealthy, we were considered middle class because of the jobs that my father had. And we moved from the projects and we moved to a house. We didn't own that first house. But going back a little bit, when I was in the 5th grade, finished up 5th grade, my father got this fantastic deal to buy a house in Washington, D.C. So he moved us to Washington, D.C. These really kids that all we knew was Alexandria. All we knew was like maybe the 3-block area around the house. So we moved to Washington, D.C. It was awful. The people didn't like us. They thought we were stuck up, and we weren't. We were just regular kids and got out there playing and everything, but the house was rat infested, and I don't know. He thought he got a good deal. We lived there 6 months, and then we came back to Alexandria because we knew that we did not belong over there. Well, my father knew that. And after I went to work at the Pentagon, I went to work. I forgot. I worked at the post office first. I worked at Alexandria Post Office for a year. Then I went to work at the Pentagon as a mail clerk because I was a clerk at the post office. I went to work as a mail clerk at the Pentagon for the Air Force, and I worked my way from clerk, mail clerk, file clerk, um, clerk typist, and then full secretary for a division at the Pentagon. Um, as things went along, I was a secretary. I One day, this was in the 70s, and computers were just coming out then. And we only had we had a computer room with one computer, but I was a division secretary. One day, the computer person, I don't know what her title was then, we just called her the computer person, she got sick. And my boss, who they were always going to testify on Capitol Hill, they needed reports. And they didn't have the computer to get that report. And my boss says, Dora, go back there and see if you can do something on that machine. And I said, well, I don't know anything about it, but I'll go back there and I'll try. So I went back there, I looked at the manual and I hit a few buttons and figured out how to get the report out. It wasn't formatted very well and it wasn't pretty, but I got the data out that they needed. They went to Capitol Hill, they testified. The next day, one of the other colonels decided that he needed a report. He asked my boss, he said, can Dora go back there and see if she can get that report? So I said, well, I'll go try. I don't know anything about this thing. And I ended up working back there 6 months. And my boss said, I said, well, what about my job here? He says, that's okay. I'll get one of the clerk typists to fill in for you. But I actually worked back there in that computer room. And after 6 months, I made pretty reports. I could compile data. I could make that machine run and everything like that. And the girl that was there, she never came back. She got sick, couldn't come back. So the position came open, and I said, well, I'll apply for it. I've been doing it for 6 months, so no way they can't give me this job, I thought. And I applied for it. I did not get it. They gave it to someone else, they said, because that person was more qualified. When that person came in, they asked me to train her, and I said, no, how can I train her when she's more qualified than I am? And I refused. And they actually wrote me up for insubordination. I filed an EEO complaint. Long story short, filed an EEO complaint. And they said, her job description says secretary, doesn't say anything about computer operators. So I won that EEO complaint. That was back in the, I guess, middle 70s, something like that. But anyway, after doing that work, I decided I like this. So I enrolled at Northern Virginia Community College in a computer science, and everybody said, you can't work in computers because you have to be really good in math. Well, my computer teacher told me, no, you have to be good in logic. And the math, you got a calculator to figure out the math. So I became a computer programmer analyst for the United States Air Force, one of the first black ones they had. There was a group of us that they started a new program. And by this time in the government, I was a GS9. In order to go and to be a computer programmer, I had to go all the way back to a GS5. And I had been mail clerk, file clerk, clerk typist, secretary, administrative assistant, and now I'm a computer programmer. And that was, my career in the government. I worked there. I worked from a 5 all the way up to a 12. Then I got to be a 13. I was detailed as a 14, but I had to go back to my old job as a 13. I was there. I retired. I was there on 9/11. I'm a 9/11 survivor. I was in the building. I remember we were sitting at a conference table, and we had a big bang, and we go, oh, that's probably one of those machines. They had, the work people had these automated machines that they ran up and down, and occasionally they ran into the wall. And it wasn't until our sergeant came in and said, we've been hit, meaning we've been bombed. And so everybody had to come out and evacuate. And then as we were evacuating, I was with my supervisor, and she asked about the gentleman in my office who had had a stroke. He didn't go to the meeting because we left him there, and we told him, we'll tell you what happened. And she said, oh, he's still in the office. We need to go get him. And so I said, I'll go get him because I'm faster than you guys. Yeah, I went back and running to the Pentagon by this time, everybody's running. Nobody knows where they're running to. But I've been there over 30 years, so I know every exit to get out. So I run back to my office. We worked on the first floor. And in the Pentagon, if you've ever been there, you know, it is a Pentagon, but in between each row, there are driveways and alleys all through there. So I cut through a couple of doors and alleys. And when I got back to my office, I opened the door and he wasn't there. Somebody had gotten him out. And I look back at my supervisor and another coworker. They're there too. And I'm in my office. When I went to work that day, I didn't have time to do anything but put my purse, my backpack on my desk. So it's sitting there. So while I'm there, I said, I'm going to get my purse and my backpack. And I did. And they came in and they got theirs. And we started going down the hall. And as we were going down the hall, we could see the burning behind us. As we were going down the hall to get out, we were walking really fast. We heard a big like whoosh like that, and I turned around and the debris is rolling down the hall like this after us. And I'm yelling at that, you know, run, run, run. And we get out, we close the door because each corridor has double doors that you can close to seal them off in case of emergencies or whatever. We get out there, we're in the street, and up on the second floor, there's a woman hanging on a curtain because she came out the window because her office is on fire. We helped her down, and we all went out to North Parkin. When we got to out the doors to North Parkin, we heard this big bang, and we thought it was another bomb. But if you look back at what happened then, that was when the building collapsed on that side. It hadn't collapsed to that point. Everything was just burning, but that was the side that burned. And we're out there in North Parkin, like I'm a civilian, everybody else, civilians, military, everybody fell on the ground because we didn't know. We didn't know if we were being bombed or not. And that was during that time was when the other plane flew over us, and it flew around. That's the one. Wait a minute. Another plane came over, and we thought it was coming to bomb us, but it wasn't. And then the F-16s had come up from what's the place? The Air Force Base down by Virginia Beach. I can't think of the name of it now. In Hampton. But anyway, the F-16 flew over, and of course we were all cheering and everything. But it was too late, you know. The plane had already hit the Pentagon, and the plane that was going to Pennsylvania, that's what the other plane was. And they were chasing it, but it was too late because they crashed that one in the ground. But anyway, I've written about my story about what happened that day on 9/11, but I'm just grateful to have gotten out, and most of my friends got out, but I know a lot of people who died that day because if we had not been in that meeting, we would have been in the snack bar on the third floor where the wheel of the plane was. And so thankful, grateful, everything you want to say about that. Say it was just, and we didn't want to go to the meeting, so it was good that we went. Going back to growing up at Alexandria, my mother's sister, Leonard Calloway, was a civil rights and labor activist in the city of Alexandria. And I remember growing up, we used to think he was nuts because he would picket places. This was before everybody else. He was way ahead of his time. He would picket the health department for rights for black citizens. He'd picket the Alexandria Housing Authority, and he lived in the projects. And we were going, you're going to get evicted, you know, doing stuff like that. But he picketed City Hall. He picketed everywhere. He ended up being one of the best, I know, probably unknown activists in Alexandria. Some people know him. I know you had Gwen Day here, and she knew him, and she knew what he did. But he picketed everything in Alexandria, any place that he thought was being unfair. He picketed this library back in the day. And so he was going around doing that because we were kids. I thought he was nuts. When I was 10 years old, he told me, by the time you're 18, you'll be going to school with white kids. And I said, oh, okay, Uncle, you know, whatever you say. Because like I said, we thought he was just nuts, but he was just way ahead of his time. He worked in the labor movement. I don't know what union that was. I don't remember. But he, labor activist, civil rights activist, up until the day he died. He was still calling people and everything. He got to know Dale Pepper, um, what was the congressman? It was a congresswoman from Alexandria. He was really good friends with him. He was friends with oh man, I should have wrote it down. The other congressman in Alexandria, and he did that for years. And it wasn't until I was older that I realized what he did and began to appreciate what he did. And the family now appreciates that. Not many, none of them are left now. All of his generation are gone. So we didn't get to ask the questions we needed to ask because at the time we didn't know we needed to ask those questions. And I'm currently doing a genealogical search now, trying to do my family and my husband's family. On my family, on my mother's side, one of my cousins has already done the research and come to find out that either my fifth or sixth great grandfather was Dangerfield Newby. Dangerfield Newby was the person when John Brown did the raid in West Virginia. He had gone to West Virginia. He was a free man, but his wife and children were still slaves. He was trying to work to save money to free his children. And the story is that after the raid, Dangerfield walked down the street. He was the first black man that all the people saw, and they actually killed him. And they cut his ears off and put them on their belt, and they threw him in a pigsty, and the pigs ate him up. There's a plaque in Harper's Ferry with all that information. And I was online one day, and I saw these kids doing a play about Dangerfield Newby, and I'm going, wow. And at the African American Museum, the last time I went, they did have a plaque up there with his name on it and saying what had happened to him. So at first, I wasn't going to do this because I said, well, I don't really have anything to tell. But I think years from now, when somebody looks at this and they'll see what I've done, I realize that I need to say these things and get them out so that future generations will know and hear this. I ended up, because they were so strict, I was in a band. I played the flute in the Parker Gray marching band. We were a great band back in those days. When they used to have the George Washington birthday parade, we were like the main attraction coming down that, and it was straight down Washington Street, not like it is now. They actually closed Washington Street from the beginning all the way down to the end almost before you get to where you're going to the Parkway. But I used to march in the band, and in the band, back in those days, I had long hair, and the band director made everybody put their hair under the hat. So I looked like a boy. I never looked like a girl. So the next year, it took me a lot to get them to let me do that because I said they were very strict. The next year, I said, I'm not going to be in the band. We had a dance group that performed at halftime called the Cadets, and they wore red skirts and white cashmere blouses, sweaters that you button down the back, and the white tennis shoes, PF Flyers, and white socks, the white Bobby socks. And I joined that group because I said, I want to look like a girl. My father, he said, let me see the outfit, and he was like, I don't know about this. And I said, I'm just going to be on the field. I'm going to do my act, and I'll be right back home. Because the other part I wanted to tell you is my father, James Edward Hunt Sr., was one of the greatest gospel singers ever born. He sang gospel music in one group called the Silver Stars, and the last group he was in was called the Mighty Spiritual Lights of Alexandria, Virginia. He performed with all of the gospel greats, the people that you're seeing on TV now, the older ones my dad performed with. When I was 5 years old, I was singing gospel music. My sisters and I were put into a group when we were young called the Hunt Sisters. And we sang together up until we were teenagers and everybody got married. We came back together on the Spiritual Lights 48th anniversary. And that was our debut back. And we started being the opening act, because the opening act on a gospel program, people don't like to say act and performance about gospel music because it's a ministry, and it really is. But we would be the people who performed before the big people came out. The lower you are, you open the act. So since we were coming back, my father was a promoter. So he'd put us on first, and it got so that we got so good that we actually were the guest group. But we opened for the Mighty Clouds of Joy, the Jackson Southerneers, um, Shirley Caesar. Back in the day, we were the opening act because we were like the nobodies, and we actually worked our way up to where we were the star group, and we could have our own group. And it was because my father was a promoter, and my father taught us the gospel singing business. He taught us how to promote a program, and I ended up not only singing gospel music but emceeing a lot of church programs around the city of Alexandria. I have sung at every, especially black church in the city, and some of the white churches. We sang up and down the East Coast. I don't know if you've ever heard of something called the Chicken Circuit. That's where the rock and roll singers would sing up and down the East Coast. They called it the Chicken Circuit because everywhere you went to sing, people would feed you chicken. So, and it was all the James Brown. Oh God, I can't. The four. This is the Four Tops. Um, I can't think of some of the older groups, but they all had a circuit that they sang up and down the East Coast at all the big venues where you had programs. And as gospel singers, I did that too. I was the lead singer in the Hunt Sisters from Alexandria. We were called the Exciting Hunt Sisters because when we came out, we got everybody excited. And you know, first, like I said, first I wasn't going to come here because I said, I don't have anything to tell. But I did tell about my dad and my uncle and my mom and my aunts and everything. As far as church goes, the first church I ever went to was called Trinity Baptist Church. And it was on the corner of Orinoco and Pitt Street. It's not there. And I don't know why it stopped being. I was like maybe 6 years old when that church went away, maybe 7. But I used to sing in the church choir there too. And my aunt, Lily Miller, she was a great singer. She used to sing in the choir there, and she was a lead singer. I learned a lot from her about how to be a lead singer. Besides learning, I lived with my father, so I was learning all the time. And he was not only into gospel music. When we were children, we were only children in the projects that listened to Beethoven and Bach and Gershwin, and because he said we needed to be well-rounded. So we listened to country western. We listened to everything so that we could combine all of those things in the music that we were singing. So after Trinity Baptist Church, that was, my father decided he was going to be Pentecostal. Back in that day, Pentecostal or Holy Rollers were not popular. People talked about it. But Mount Nebo Pentecostal Church was in the 800 block of Queen Street. It was just a house, and they converted it into a church. Later, they moved to 2300 Burke Avenue in Delray. But after that, while I was going to, and I went to that church up until, probably I was in my 30s, I think. And my husband's Catholic. And I was going to the Catholic church. I raised my children Catholic, and they did that. And I converted to Catholicism. And when I converted to Catholicism, Calvin's mother, grandmother, and his great-grandfather founded St. Joseph Catholic Church, Thomas Blair. Thomas Blair's daughter was Mary Virginia Gaines, and then her daughter, Mary Ellen Gaines, married Ellis Jones. So part of that family, after I started going to the Catholic Church, his grandmother started telling me all of the history of St. Joseph Catholic Church, and I have to correct people all the time about the history. And his mother also, because his mother ended up living with us, and I learned a lot about Thomas Blair and Mr. Gaines, and how St. Joseph, I don't know if you've ever heard, St. Joseph was formed because the Catholics, black Catholics, went to St. Mary's, but they had to sit in the back, and they could never go to the front of the church to receive the sacraments like communion, baptism, or marriage. If they got married, some of them got married in the Lyceum, or they might have had their baptisms in the Lyceum. Otherwise, it was at somebody's house because they weren't allowed to go up there. So Mr. Blair was the sexton or the sacristan at St. Mary's. And by working there and doing the cemetery, he got to know the bishop, and they became friends. And he said, this isn't right that black Catholics can't go up and receive the same thing as the white Catholics. And he said, I want to build a church where black people can go to. So he talked to the bishop, and the bishop told him, we'll get the plan together, get a committee, and come down to Richmond and talk to me. And so he did that. He got permission. The only thing was they had to raise the money to build that church. And of course, black people were the poorest in the city, but they had chicken dinners, oyster dinners, hay rides, dances, anything that you could think of. And they raised the first $8,000 to build that church. And one of the priests there knew Catherine Drexel up in Pennsylvania. So he went to her and asked her, can you do anything? Can you help us? So her sisters, mother and father, brother-in-law, they donated $8,000. St. Joseph Catholic Church cost $16,000 to build in 1915, mostly because a lot of the black men were craftsmen. They were carpenters. They were bricklayers. They built the basement of that church and built it up enough where they started having services there. And then the rest of it was built. The ground was broken in October of 1915. The church was dedicated and opened in May of 1916. So you see, I'm the griot for that family. I'm also the matriarch for the Hunt family. I'm the matriarch for the Jones family too. But, that's about all I can remember. The traditions in my family was singing.
Singing, yes.
We sang every weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And Sunday it was morning till night, but at least they fed us in the middle. But we sang everywhere and all the time. Like I said, my father was very strict, very protective, and we didn't go anywhere. We went to church. That's where we went and entertained. I don't fish. All of my children fish.
Do they sing? Did you pass that along to them?
One of them do, but I can't get them out. I'm hoping the grandkids. I have a granddaughter who likes to sing, so I'm disappointed that I haven't gotten any of them to sing. And my sisters, one sister has a son that sings. And the rest of them, I think it was because we dragged them around so much to church that they just didn't want to go anymore. But, they may change and do it. They can sing because when they were younger, they were in the choir at church. That's my father always made us sing, so I made them sing, but none of them ever wanted to go professional. We still consider, the Hunt sisters, we still consider ourselves amateurs. We recorded background on some of my father's records. We had records then, 45s. And we did the background on a lot of those recordings. But other than that, we never recorded our own song. We got older and we stopped singing because I used to tell my father, he'd book us Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I said, you can't do that. We're married. We got children. We work. I worked. I sang. I kept house. I said, we can only sing 2 weekends a month. My father, as a promoter, he book you. If there was an opening, he's going to book you into it. And I had to tell him, no, we can't do that. But I love singing, and I sing in the St. Joseph Gospel Choir now. I used to sing in the St. Joseph Chorale before the pandemic, but after the pandemic, it kind of like broke up, or some of the people didn't come back. And I joined the St. Joseph Gospel Choir. They had been trying to get me to join it for years, and I finally did. And it's a good choir, This is in the twilight of my years, but I still like to sing. I still MC programs around the city occasionally. Mount Nebo sold their church, so they're not there anymore, but they do church, I think, at a hotel on Eisenhower or something like that. And I go there when they need an MC. I'm always available. They always be, even though I'm Catholic and I'm proud to be Catholic and I belong to St. Joseph, Mount Nebo will always be my home church, So my traditions were just growing up and having big family dinners. We believed we could stop by. My dad used to live on the corner of Bellefonte. He used to live at 1 West Bellefonte. And we would ride by there. He had a big driveway there and 2-car garage. And any day of the week, you could come by there and you'd see the grill going and people out there having fun. And it was just family. We get off from work from the Pentagon, drive down there and stop, say, hey, what y'all doing? And my stepmom used to cook fish on the grill, fried fish. She put the iron skillet on the grill, get the grill out, get the grease, fry fish, and she'd fry potatoes. And we had just have fish and fried potatoes. That my family is good for having good food and cooking and stuff like that. A favorite piece to sing? This Little Light of Mine. That's my theme song. So that's it. The thing I would say is somebody who's watching this is to remember that we all have history and we all have things to tell and we all have things to remember, to make sure we try to pass that on, which I'm trying to do in doing my genealogical research. And hopefully I'll have enough to put it in a book and give it to them so they'll have it. So just, don't give up traditions. People have traditions. Our traditions are on holidays, our family gets together and everybody comes or else. So, and it doesn't matter how old you get or who you are or what you do, what your profession is, you still come back home, have those family dinners because that's, when it comes down to it, blood is more important than anything else. If you ever need help, family are the ones who are going to help you.